Today I'm going to go over some different methods of polishing and oxidizing metals. So I get a lot of questions from my students about the finishing of the pieces. You know, you've stamped your metal blank, or maybe you've made a really wonderful piece that you've soldered, and then sometimes things fall astray at the end. So today I'm going to go over some really sound polishing and oxidizing techniques so that your piece will look really finished and really professional right up until the very end. So we're going to talk about several methods. We're going to use liver of sulfur as our oxidizing solution. So things can vary with liver of sulfur. It depends on how hot the water is, how strong your solution is. So sometimes it's not that easy to gauge your results. Well, we're going to look at some different metals. We're going to work on sterling silver and copper today, and we're going to see how the liver of sulfur reacts on those metals. We're also going to use several different polishing techniques. We're going to use a simple pro polish pad. We're going to use a wire brush, a brass wire brush, as well as a steel wire brush and some steel wool. I also want to show you how a sunshine cloth used at the end is going to make everything really nice and polished and finished looking. Liver of sulfur, you may be familiar with it coming in a rock or a crystal form. This works exactly the same way, except it has a much longer shelf life than the rock form of liver of sulfur. I'm going to show you actually one of the bottles that we use here at Beaducation. It's not as pretty or pristine, you can see, as that new bottle, but this has probably been open at least a year, and it still has a lot of effectiveness in it. It's as good as the day we opened it. So even if your liver of sulfur solution starts to look a little dingy, you're going to be just fine with using it. Also, if you've had your liquid liver of sulfur for a while and you haven't used it and it's sat undisturbed, you may see a layer of crystal form. The liver of sulfur will crystallize and harden over the surface. And when you go to dump it out, nothing will dump because there's a layer, a hard layer of like rock that is formed in your liver of sulfur. In that case, all you need to do is just kind of squeeze the bottle and break that crystal up. And you can see this has actually happened to this bottle. There's some floating around in the bottom there. It doesn't reduce its effectiveness at all. You can just continue to use it like you would normally. You'll get a few more things in your package with the liver of sulfur, and those are to help you use the liver of sulfur in a safe environment so you're safe when you're working with it. We put a little sheet here with directions in there for you to look over, so it'll help you guide you using the liver of sulfur step by step. On the bottle itself, the directions actually talk about how to use it on copper, but we use the liver of sulfur both on copper and on sterling silver. So these instructions talk about using the liver of sulfur with both of those metals. So you have your directions here. I suggest you read them over. We've also included this little eyedropper in your package, and this is so you can easily take the liver of sulfur out of the bottle and put it into the water bath. You also want to wear a pair of disposable gloves when you're handling the liver of sulfur. While it's not an extremely harmful chemical, it will irritate your skin if you do come in contact with it. If it does contact your skin, you want to make sure to wash your hands thoroughly with soap and water. So you can see I put on my disposable gloves here, and I have a water bath in front of me in a container. You can see if I turn it around, it actually says LOS, and this is something that we keep under the sink with our liver of sulfur bottle so that we don't reuse it for food. In the directions, we recommend perhaps using a jar with a lid, which is a great way to go as well. That way you can store your liver of sulfur and reuse it until it's lost its effectiveness. If you are going to reuse your liver of sulfur, all you need to do is simply heat it on a little coffee warmer hot pad just to get it warm again, because the liver of sulfur actually is most potent when the solution is warm. So I have a paper towel here that I'm going to spread out and put my liver of sulfur container, my water container on. It contains water that's pretty hot. We actually got this from the hot tap in our water dispenser. So that water is just under boiling. So it's pretty warm water here. I have my eyedropper and I have my liver of sulfur. Now when you open the liver of sulfur, you're going to notice one big thing: the smell. It does smell like sulfur. To put it delicately, perhaps like rotten eggs. So you want to use this really in a well-ventilated area because it is a pretty potent smell. Now I have about a cup of water, maybe a little less, here in the solution or in this container. In the directions that we send you, we tell you that the liver of sulfur should be diluted in a ratio of 1 capful to about 4 cups of water. So you can see this is a little less than a cup, so I'm going to use much less than this capful. So I'm going to actually have the capful, or the cap rather, help me measure. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some liver of sulfur in my eyedropper. I'm going to drop it into the cap, and I'm going to give myself one more eyedropper full. Now, when I mix liver of sulfur, I really look at the color of the solution that I'm making. You can see that capful is filled maybe about 1/4 of the way, maybe a little less than that. I'm going to drop it in slowly into my water, and I want a nice yellowy color, not something that's too orange. I'm going to swirl that around. That's pretty good. I'm going to add the rest of that capful. I'm going to go ahead and recap my bottle here so I don't have it go all over the floor. And to mix it, I have a plastic spoon. You don't want to use anything in your kitchen that you're going to go back and use with food. So you don't want to mix your food and your jewelry making patinas. That wouldn't be such a good idea. You can see here, it's all mixed up and ready for our metal. Okay, so now we're ready to antique our metal. I have 2 little blanks, metal blanks here. One is sterling silver and one is copper. You can see I've stamped them with the initials LOS to stand for liver of sulfur, so you can see after we've dipped them what the result is going to be. I'm actually going to start with the sterling silver blank here. And liver of sulfur does not immediately blacken your metal. And even when it's fully antiqued or patinaed your metal, you're not going to get a really black color. It's going to be more of a darker gray. And I'm going to go ahead and dip it in, and I'm going to dip it in a couple of times. Now you can see I'm going to hold it up, and you can see the patina that I've gotten already. It almost looks like it's a copper color. So that's the first stage with liver of sulfur. I'm going to continue to dip it. Remember, my water in this solution is really nice and hot. If your water is cooler, the process is going to take a little bit longer. And I'm continuing to dip, dipping. And you don't have to have the motion of the dipping of this piece, but if I find that if I kind of move the piece around in the liver of sulfur, especially if I'm trying to go for a patina that isn't, you know, it's a little more interesting, maybe a little more uneven, it gives me, I think, a better result. So you can see now I still have some coppery color on there. Might be able to see that a little bit better at that angle there. And a little bit of darkening, a little bit more darkening on this side of the piece. So let's keep going. Now with this sterling, remember I'm using sterling silver here. This works the same way on fine silver. Let's say that you're a PMC artist and you like working with the precious metal clay. I think that liver of sulfur really is the antiquing solution of choice for me when I antique the PMC. I think, again, it adds a lot of subtlety to the piece and just doesn't look quite as harsh as a different blackening agent might. Alrighty, let's take a look at this. You can see we're getting a lot darker here. We have some blue tones in this, and you can see how the liver of sulfur has really settled into those letters. I'm going to get even closer here. Can you see that? And when I kind of tilt it to the side so you can kind of see the light shine off, you can see that over towards my hand over here, the blank looks a little more coppery, and over on this side here, it looks a little more gray or blue. I'm going to go ahead and just put it in the solution, and let's let it get all the way dark and a little more even. You could, however, stop at any time and polish it up. You can also certainly leave kind of the variegated color effect that liver of sulfur gives you. You would just need to seal it to make sure that that patina stays. Either seal it by buffing a little bit of wax onto the surface of my metal, or spraying it very lightly with a matte acrylic fixative, spraying one side, letting it dry, and then spraying the other. Okay, so the question that might be coming to your mind right now is, how long did it take to get this little blank, the sterling silver blank, that dark? Well, I'll tell you, this has been soaking in the liver of sulfur for about 2 minutes to about 2.5 minutes, and we've really achieved a nice dark patina on this. That darkening time, though, really depends on several factors. First of all, how potent your liver of sulfur solution is, and how hot the water is, as well as if your blank has been heated before you put it into the liver of sulfur. If I had heated this blank, let's say, in some boiling water or some really hot water before I stuck it into the liver of sulfur, it would have gone to this black color a lot faster than it did when we did that little dipping it in and out exercise. We got a little more of a gradual color on there so you could see it. But if you throw these blanks in some really hot water and then throw them right into your liver of sulfur, they're going to darken up really, really quickly. Now that we have achieved a patina that we like, we're just going to go ahead and put our little blank right into some clear water to rinse. And I'll usually take this after I rinse it in the little bowl. I'll go ahead and take it under the faucet and give it a nice, whoosh with some water from the tap. Once it's all rinsed, you want to make sure and dry it thoroughly with a paper towel. Once it's dry completely, you're now ready to polish your piece. You can see I've switched up with a copper blank here, and I'm going to dip this into our liver of sulfur solution. The liver of sulfur works a lot faster on the copper piece, so you can see as I dip it in, you can see it almost turns black immediately. So I'm going to let it sit in there for a moment. If your liver of sulfur solution is too strong, you'll know it when you work with copper. If the liver of sulfur is too strong and you dip your copper piece in there, you're going to have almost like a little bit of flaking of the patina comes off from the surface. I'll grab that up so you can see. That was just really quick and that got really black. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my water in here and rinse this out. And I'm going to go ahead and dry it with my paper towel. And this is the point when I was saying earlier, if your liver of sulfur solution is just too heavy of a solution or too concentrated of a solution, you're going to have some wiping off of the patina. And you can see even here how it starts to come off on my on my paper towel. That's just kind of what naturally happens when you use the copper, so don't let that alarm you too much. But you can see on the copper, I'm going to put the copper one here on this side, and I'm going to bring the silver one that I did back in, and you can see there is just a slight difference how the copper piece is a little bit darker and the sterling piece is a little bit lighter. Now it's time to polish our blanks. You can see that I have all of the blanks here that are patinaed, the copper on the top and the sterling on the bottom. We're going to use 3 different methods to polish our pieces today, and then I'm going to show you actually a 4th little bonus method on shining them on the last step. So we're going to use a Pro Polish pad, and you can see we're going to do that on the blank that says Pro Polish. We're going to use a brass brush on the brass brush blank, and we're going to use some steel wool on the blank that is stamped steel wool. I'm going to start out by polishing the silver blanks. First up, we're going to polish with the Pro Polishing pads. Let me tell you a little bit about these pads though before we get started. This is a tight bond cellular foam that has a microabrasive permanently adhered to the surface. You can use both sides of this pad, and you can use it until it's really black all over. Then you'll probably want to discard it and use a new one. You can see it's nice and flexible, so you can get it around corners and around the edge of what you're polishing. And you want to make sure that when you use these Pro Polish pads, that the pad, your hands, and the piece that you are polishing is completely dry. And if they're wet, they'll really leave a gummy residue on the surface of what you're polishing. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my Pro Polish pad and just start to polish up my blank, my liver of sulfur patinaed blank here. Now, I'm not rubbing too hard, but I just want to start to remove some of the surface patina. Now you can see how I have already gotten a nice mirrored surface on this piece. So you can just continue. I'm pressing the polishing pad now from my first, I went over it first just kind of lightly, but now I'm starting to press the pad into the surface of the metal and move the metal around. The liver of sulfur is going to stay in the recessed letters that are stamped onto this blank. But remember, the liver of sulfur is really more of a dark gray solution than a black solution, so you're not going to see your letters really be super, super dark. And we'll continue and polish the back of the piece. You can come in with some fine steel wool. In this case, it's a 5/0 or 5/0 super fine steel wool, and you can use that steel wool to buff out any stubborn places where that liver of sulfur doesn't want to come up. So you can see how that's coming up even a little bit more than it did with the Pro Polish pad. And I'm just going to hit that blank with this steel wool. Then once I've removed as much black as I'd like, I'm going to put my steel wool down and go back to my Pro Polish pad and polish the surface. We're going to talk a little more about steel wool a little later, but that gives you a nice quick trick to get all of that black right off the surface of your metal. Another favorite polishing technique of mine is to use the brass brush. The brass brush, I think, polishes really well on both sterling silver and on copper, and I also use this trick on precious metal clay. So I start out by dipping my brush into some dishwashing detergent. In this case, I've used some Dawn dishwashing detergent. And I'm going to dip the brush in some water. And here is my sterling silver blank. And I'm really going to vigorously, which is the operative word here, brush that piece. Now, when you use the brass brush, you want to make sure and use it wet. If you use the brass brush dry, you may actually transfer some of the gold or brass color of the bristles onto your metal piece. But using it wet in water with soap as the lubricant actually helps the brass bristles of the brush polish the piece so it's nice and shiny. You can see I'm moving the brush around in kind of a circular motion, then a back and forth motion, and flipping the piece around. You don't want to actually only use this brush in one direction, because if you do that, you may actually scratch a pattern onto the surface of your blank. So here you can see the blank that's been polished with the Pro Polish pad and the blank that's been scratch brushed with the brass brush, and you can really see the difference of the surface of these two guys. So the Pro Polish pad has a nice mirror finish, and the brass brush has more of a brushed look to it. It's not as super high polish as the Pro Polish pad is, as well as there's still some patina of the liver of sulfur that's making it look a little bit darker here. I could then follow up if I wanted to get this even shinier, but maybe not quite as shiny as just the Pro Polish pad one. I could go ahead and just hit this just really lightly with my Pro Polish pad. Now we're going to do some polishing with the steel brush and the steel wool. I really like the finish that these two pieces provide on my sterling silver and my copper. It really gives you, I think, a really soft, nice surface. Not anything that's too super bright and shiny. Again, also really good for PMC, but works perfectly well on sterling silver and copper. So let's start out by using this steel wool. And remember, when you're using either the steel brush or the steel wool, your piece needs to be completely dry, because remember, when steel gets wet, it rusts. So if you get your steel brush wet like you did your brass brush, you're just going to have a big rusty mess on your hands. So you want to make sure to leave this dry. So I'm going to start by lightly buffing. I think that as you're trying to discover what surfaces you like on these pieces, I think that the lighter of a touch you use at the beginning and then kind of gradually work your way up to a more polished surface, I think is really a great way to go, because then you can really control the amount of polish that you're putting onto your pieces. So you can see I just swiped the steel wool in several directions. Again, this steel wool is a 5/0 or 5/0 steel wool, so it's a super fine steel wool. It still gives the surface a little bit of scratching, but I actually like that finish, and that's why I would use this steel wool. You can see the steel wool, though, does leave some residue, so if you use the steel brush, you can use it really the same way. It is going to take a little more of the darkening out of your letters, I find, so that your letters, again, won't stay as black as they might with the Pro Polish pad. But I'm just moving the brush kind of around, and I can also kind of move the brush in circles as well, because you don't want to brush a pattern onto the surface of your metal. So you can see it gives you a nice, what I think is a nice subtle texture, and I think a really soft finish to the surface of your metal. So here we have all of our blanks polished up. The real lesson I want you to take away from all of these demonstrations is that there's a lot of different ways to polish your pieces after they have been antiqued using the liver of sulfur. Just to quickly recap, the Pro Polish pad on the sterling silver, just straight liver of sulfur and then hitting it with that Pro Polish pad really gives you the highest mirror shine. You can see here's that Pro Polish pad on the copper blank, also a nice shine, but remember we use that steel wool to get more of the liver of sulfur off the surface of this blank. So you can see that it has maybe not quite the mirror shine that the sterling one did because the steel wool left a little bit of some surface texture on that blank. The sterling silver brass brush and the copper brass brush also give kind of a nice subtle surface to the metal. The silver still has some residue of the liver of sulfur on it, and the brass brush you can also see there's a little bit of liver of sulfur left on there, but I think it adds a lot to the personality of the pieces. Steel wool in both sterling silver and copper give you a more matted surface. So if you're not looking for something that's super shiny and maybe has a little more of a textural feel, I think steel wool or the steel brush is a great way to go. And then of course here were our original blanks in sterling silver and in copper that were dipped in the liver of sulfur before they were polished. The liver of sulfur and copper, I just wanted to make a note, when you saw me dip that copper blank into the liver of sulfur, I really left it in there a long time so it would get nice and black. If you don't want your pieces to be quite as difficult to polish, you may just want to dip it in just very quickly so that the liver of sulfur settles into what you've stamped and perhaps the rest of your blank isn't as dark as this one is here. You'll have a much easier time polishing the whole thing if you just maybe dip it for that shorter amount of time. If you do like a piece that has a little more of a rough and worn look to it, then I would go ahead and leave it a little bit longer in the liver of sulfur when it's copper. In sterling though, you can see it was nice and dark and that Pro Polish pad just hit it and took that darkening away pretty evenly. Now I mentioned a little trick that I wanted to share with you earlier, and I want to do this at the very end. You may recognize this Sunshine metal polishing cloth. Now I think some of you may be a little bit confused as to what the Sunshine cloth actually does. So let me give you a little bit of a clarification. The Sunshine cloth is actually just for removing tarnish or polishing the surface of the metal. If you've antiqued your pieces using an antiquing solution, it won't take the black off. It'll just make the surface metal nice and shiny. So let me show you just by polishing the surface of this blank that's still dark with the liver of sulfur. See how nice and shiny that surface is getting? But see how it's still nice and black. So if you're using a Sunshine cloth and you're trying to get the antiquing off of your metal and you look at it and you go, well, why is this still black? It's because this really doesn't have any abrasive in it. It just has a polishing agent. So you're just polishing that metal rather than taking any of the black off the surface. But it's another great option, I think, if you did want to leave your metal nice and dark, you can just go ahead and hit it with the Sunshine cloth. The Sunshine cloth actually is the last step that I do to most of my metals to just impart a little bit of shine and a nice finishing technique to make your metal look nice and professionally done. Of course, you could throw all of these pieces into a tumbler and tumble them for a bit to also get a nice bit of shine on the surface. But you can see how the follow-up with that Sunshine cloth on these metals, I think, really adds a nice final step to your blanks. Well, that's it. Now you know everything there is to know, or at least everything I know, about working with liver of sulfur and polishing. Remember that this wasn't a super intense finishing class. You know, there are many more finishes that you can do with this, a buffing wheel, different things with your flex shaft, stuff like that. But I think this hand finishing will get you to a pretty good start. I also want to mention that with liver of sulfur, do remember that with any chemical that we use in the metalsmithing studio, we do want to be cautious. We want to make sure and take our safety precautions by wearing our safety glasses. You want to make sure and wear those gloves when you're oxidizing. And for disposal of the liver of sulfur, I find the best way to deal with that is to mix it in small batches and just simply let it evaporate. If you do need to dispose of it, I would recommend actually flushing it down the toilet. What we have, with our research that we have talked to several chemists about, is that water treatment plants, when the water goes through the toilet and into the waste system, that there is a sufficient amount of treatment to that water, so we won't be harming the environment that way. Septic tanks, you're on your own. I might not actually let this go into my septic tank and do the air evaporation method may be the best. But we always recommend that you do some research on these things, and if you do find something out, we always appreciate your tips and your feedback. So have a great time with your finishing and your polishing, and I can't wait to see the pieces that you make. See you next time.